Thanks for coming to the very last Church Music Forum of the semester. This semester, we were able to put all the Church Music Forums closer to the beginning of the semester. It's actually the way they worked out, with some guest speakers who were on campus and things like that. So we thought that's really quite a good thing, because that gives you, as your semester gets busier, and inevitably it does, it gives us a bit more time toward the end of the semester to have this Monday evening time space free. So this is actually the last one. But it seems like we just got started and here we are at the turn. We were thinking back last spring about Church Music Forum topics for this year, and we thought that it would be nice and helpful for us to get a chance to hear from the doctoral students and hear a little bit about what they're doing in terms of research. One of the goals that we had when we started the doctoral program here was to be able for doctoral students to be integrated within the life of all undergraduate students and master's students. And I think we've done a very good job of that. I think these students have done a good job of that. I don't think we have. But I think they've shown up for things, they've been present, they've worked on projects, they've interacted with you all in a lot of ways, and now they're beginning to teach in some of your classes and different things. So it's really great that we can learn from each other and benefit. I don't know about you, but as an undergrad, and not very much as a graduate student, that I had any concept of what research might actually be going on in my field, in the field that I was studying, and I didn't know even that things existed. So I thought it would be just really great to get to hear what these folks say. But I want to acknowledge two other doctoral students. So we have these men, and then we also have Maria Montiero, who is right here. Maria, would you stand up and let us? I want students to know who you are. This is Maria. And Maria is a new church music doctoral student this semester, and she is just beginning to get a research agenda off the ground and starting to fly, and so she chose not to be a part of this. But Maria is a seasoned church musician and a seasoned teacher. She is the director of the church music program at Baptist University of the Americas in San Antonio. So a wonderful person that I would love for you all to get to know. We also don't have Rob Carnes here. Rob is done with coursework, and we were just joking that with all the time since we've seen him, he should be showing up with a dissertation in hand any day. So we're hopeful that Rob is having some very productive time. So what we've asked these students to do is to take about 7 minutes to talk about a little bit about themselves, and then about a little bit about the research that they're working on. And then we'll have some time for you to ask questions. So you might want to take some notes about things that you didn't understand or wish you knew better, or perhaps you have some input to give them as well. Okay, so why don't we start with Mr. Nate Myrick right here.
Well, hi everybody, I'm Nate Myrick. I'm going to start a timer so I don't go over with my little spiel here. After that, I was just joking with these guys.
I had the same idea, that's right.
I was just joking with these guys that they probably shouldn't ask me to go first because everybody is awake right now and to maintain awakeness, but you struggle to stay awake at the time, sorry. So I grew up in a tiny little town in northern Minnesota called War Road, and that's actually War Road. It's a trading post on the warpath between the Lakota and the Ojibwe, so that's the origin of where I grew up. And then I went to undergrad at a place called Providence College in Manitoba, in Canada, and it's cold there. And and then I did my master's at Fuller Seminary, and I studied theology and the arts, specifically with an emphasis on music. And then now I'm here. I've worked as a touring musician, and as a missionary, and as a screenwriter. So that's kind of my background before coming to Baylor. My research here, let's see here, is focused on 3 different tracks. So on the one hand, I have a traditional historical study of race relationships in the United States between church, like within the context of church and music, and how those different identities are negotiated and performed into being. So when I say performed into being, I'm assuming that people don't start off with a sense of who I am, and this is me, and this is what I do, but that's actually something that's learned and that's performed and sort of constructed through experience. And so when I talk about something like the performing of a racial identity, which we all do, Race is something that's performed into being. It's not a biological reality from the beginning. That's something that we sort of either opt into or told that we belong to. And so those sorts of identities are constructed. They're formed by participation in practice. So what I study is how those things have evolved and developed in the context of the United States in the last 150 years, give or take. So that's one path of what I do. The other side is I study popular music and its relationship to the church. So how rock and roll in particular informs the way we do worship, the way we do prayer, and the way that we conceive of God. So what we think about as who God is I argue in a number of ways, informed by the way we participate in cultural music. In cultural music, I say rock and roll because that's what I do, but it could also be country music or pop or rap or hip hop or dubstep or whatever you like and stuff like that. That informs a lot of our view of God. So part of that is scientific. So there's a whole field of scholarship that looks at the relationships scientifically between humans' brain, like how we think, how our neural processes work, so how one thought leads to another and how we walk down these paths in our mind of what we think and what we know, and how that is actually formed by listening to music. So you've heard, I'm sure, the idea that thoughts are built and neural paths are constructed. So you have a thought and that kind of leads to another thought. But then you encounter a piece of information that is not in line with where you think it should go, and that actually is a part of forming a new way of thinking, right? You're building a new neural pathway. Does this make sense? So when you do that in the context of music, it has this very peculiar generative effect on your brain, and that generative effect is emotional. So when you listen to music in the company of someone else, you are essentially building these new emotional neural paths, and they're connected to each other, to other people, but they're also connected to what we conceive of as God and as divine. So when we actually do worship together, we are, in a sense, physically connecting to an idea of God, but also physically to each other. So it's this scientific, cultural engagement with music that does have this formative aspect on what we think about God. Now, because of that, this is my third area of research, and this is actually what my dissertation is focusing on. I'm looking at how music and church music, congregational music, and worship make us have an ethical identity. So when I say ethical identity, I mean the way that our convictions, the really deep parts of what we think and believe, are oriented towards some sort of goal, something that we consider to be good. So we believe that there is something good in the world. There's the gospel. There's these really good big things. And the way that we orient ourselves towards them is how I say ethical identity, ethical orientation. Okay? Now, again, because of these other things that I've just said about music and science, music plays a role in the way that our affections or our emotions are oriented and constructed in relation to that ethical goal of good, right? And that little weird blob is something that I want to say is theological ethics, and I want to say that in music, ethics are construed by care. And I bring that back to the idea of, Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two hang all of the law and the prophets. So the whole of the Bible. Basically, right? This is it. And so I say, okay, so that could be called caring. That could be called in a certain sense. Now, there's a number of different ways of saying that exact same thing, but the way I'm trying to say it in relation to music and ethics and theology is caring. Being oriented towards care for one another, for creation, for social structures, for everything. I mean, it's this holistic view of embracing the gospel and living into the call of God in Christ through humanity and the power of the Holy Spirit to renew, participate in the renewal of all things. So that's my big picture research agenda. Who's awake? Okay, and 42 seconds left. You have time for questions or move on?
Let's move on.
Okay.
We're off to a good start. Let's keep it up.
My name is Sam Otherton. I am a minister of music in Dallas at a Lutheran church in Dallas, at Zion Lutheran Church and School. And until last year, I taught at the school, I did all the church and school music. I taught 3rd through 8th grade music. My undergrad degree is actually in music in education. And so I came here with the intention of studying organ with Isabel Demers. Anybody know Isabel Demers?
Yeah.
Anybody take lessons with her? Okay. And so that's what drew me to the program. And then I get to study with professors like the ones we have here this evening as well. So I'm a little bit different, as maybe you could tell. I'm probably the oldest one here, but I'm also different because I'm the only one in the DMA program. So I'm not doing a PhD, I'm doing a DMA. So I'm not writing a dissertation, but I am doing 2 recitals in the program document, kind of like if you're doing a master's program, similar to that. With that said, I'm still doing some research while I'm here. The program is pretty research focused, which is enjoyable, good thing, because I like to do that. My interest is mainly in the Lutheran Church, because I'm Lutheran. I grew up in the Lutheran Church. I'm a pastor's kid. Any other pastor's kids in here? All right, PKs, right? And so my interest is in the history of our church, the Lutheran Church in America specifically, and how when the Lutherans, mainly from German and Scandinavia, came over in the 19th century, they had to adapt somehow to American culture, and so they were adapting their languages, changing their language over to English eventually, and a lot of that's reflected in their music and in their hymnals. And so I've studied that. I've also done, in a more current setting, a study of how the contemporary worship music has made an impact in the Lutheran Church. The Lutheran Church has traditionally been a traditional church, very much liturgy and hymn oriented, and it was interesting to me how contemporary worship music made inroads into this very liturgical, kind of straight, rigid, sort of not rigid, well, yeah, kind of rigid, church in the 80s and 90s. So I'm the 1980s and 90s. So I'm studying 1880s and 90s and 1980s and 90s. And a third area that I'm interested in, and I've done some research in, is children in church music and the relation that children have in worship in the church. The Lutheran Church has had a system of parochial schools, much like the Catholic Church, since they landed on the shores of America for 150, 200 years. And so the Lutherans have always had this mindset of, let's build our school, and then we'll build our church afterwards. And so we'll educate our children. And so seeing how the church has educated its children is of interest. So those are my research areas. I just did my first recital a couple weeks ago, so glad that's all over with. And I am also blessed to serve in Dallas as one of the board of directors for the Lutheran Hymn Festival. It's at the Meyerson Symphony Center. Some of you have seen the posters around. It's coming up this next Sunday night. I can get you tickets. I can hook you up if you need tickets. We do this every 3 years. It's a pretty big deal. There are some probably 30 to 40 Lutheran churches in Dallas and Fort Worth that come together, form a mass choir. We have a mass children's choir. Each of those choirs have about 100 people singing in them. Cynthia Knott, the director of the Children's Chorus of Greater Dallas, directs the children's choir. I get to direct the adult choir, and we bring in sort of a big name organist, if you can think of such a thing. And it's not me. You might have heard of David Sherwin if you were at Hallelujah this summer. He presented. So he's our organist this year, and so that's coming up on Sunday night. Feel free to come up and hear that if you would like to. My end goal after this is all over is to get more sleep every night, drink less coffee, and, well, maybe not the dress, drinking less coffee. But I may continue to do what I'm doing now, which is serving in a church as the music director and organist. I may teach in a university setting, so all those options are open right now. So, thank you for listening.
Well, I am Jacob Cincinnig. I'm in my third year in the PhD program, but I've been around Baylor for a long time because I did my Master's of Divinity and Master's in Church Music here. This is my 8th year at Baylor. Feels like it's been forever, but in a good way. In a good way. I'm originally from Bowling Green, Kentucky, and so made my pilgrimage to Texas to do grad work, and I'm really glad that I did because it's been really a perfect setting to live into the calling that God has given me in both the church world, in the local church, and in the academic setting here at Baylor. So those are some things. I did my undergrad not in church music. I did started out in music education, vocal and choral, and ended up realizing I wasn't going to teach in a school system per se. So I dropped the ed stuff outside of the School of Music. I still did all the preparatory kinds of methods classes and all that, but decided I knew I wasn't going to need the teaching certificate in the school system. So I didn't student teach and all that, but I did a really intentional local church mentorship alongside of that for about 3 years, where I was involved in every kind of facet of music ministry, and that really helped me to step into what I was learning at Baylor pretty quickly. My research interests are kind of varied, like the other guys here. Actually, none of us have really streamlined into one thing yet. We're all kind of doing these different sorts of projects, but one of my interests is in Southern gospel music. I grew up singing it and then ran away from it and loathed it for a period of my life, and then have come back to it, very much appreciating it for some things and being able to critique it also as well. So that insider-outsider sort of feel along with it. Specifically, I'm looking at the music of Bill and Gloria Gaither, who I would say have been often miscategorized as Southern gospel, although some of that is their own fault because they want you to perceive them as Southern gospel. But I can say more about that, or you can read my dissertation. But they've been active since the 50s, really, as songwriters, and written over 900 songs. You probably know Because He Lives or He Touched Me. But there are so many others that you wouldn't recognize, partially because their music does a couple of things. It's congregational or participatory in nature, some of it, and then some of it is very presentational. So you might hear it on the radio or groups perform it, but we wouldn't sing it together. So there's a lot of different facets there. But I'm looking at both of those because no one has really done much work. There's one person who's looked at the Homecoming series, which they started in 1991, which totally revamped Southern gospel. It was a dying industry. In the 80s, there were so few groups, quartets that were performing in family groups. And in 1991, they gathered together this group of industry legends who were all on their deathbeds and put together this one event that spurred into this huge multimedia conglomerate. I mean, it's unreal what they've done with that since 1991. But my dissertation is looking particularly at the Gaither Vocal Band, which is a quartet that was started in 1981 or 1980. I say that, Gaither says 81. You can read some other things that I've written. But started in the early 80s and continues to this day. They've recorded over 30 full-length albums, which is pretty unheard of. Mostly with different content. Now they're going back and recording some of the early stuff in different sorts of formats, different arrangements. But I think it's pretty fascinating to me. I brought along some records from the 80s. Oh yeah. For you to look. 86, the year of my birth. But these are some others. The hot air balloon was my favorite. So good looking at the 80s sweaters and things.
Some came out on the cover of one.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
We do our best.
So I think that's where I'm going with all of that. Looking specifically at that, doing some work on this historical piece, but also looking at genre, because they start out in CCM music, and it sounds very much like the 1980s Nashville sound stuff. And then after 1991, they rebrand everything as Southern gospel. So it's competing in these genres, which meant that researchers have kind of disregarded them in both worlds, in both categories, which is great for someone to step into it and say, look, now there's this whole group that no one has done any whole thing that no one has done anything with. Looking also at some issues of production, and then finally projecting forward what, as I'll call it, the Gaither-less vocal band, as he's aged, and now there are 5 people in the group, and he's phasing himself out and raising up a next generation of people to do it, which is fascinating. And those of you who were here when he was here heard him talk a lot about surrounding himself throughout his entire career with people who were younger than him and better at what he was doing than he is. And I think that's a great model for ministry. So there's also maybe a chapter about Gaither as pastor too, which I think would be fascinating. Some of my other research interests look at liturgical formation. So what is that? If liturgy is the work of the people, liturgical formation is how worship forms us into Christians, and more in the image of Christ. So specifically looking at that in a seminary context, and through places like, I went to the Taizé community this spring and did some interviews while I was there, and with looking at these immersion sorts of courses that schools are getting into. Also went to the Christ in the Desert Monastery in May, looking at how Baptists are incorporating contemplative practices, specifically in the seminary environment. And then this last semester wrote a paper that I have turned around and I'm trying to publish, looking at repetition. Thank you. Looking at repetition in worship on a macro and a micro level, and how it affects the way that we plan. I was really convicted in my own worship planning, as I'm very kind of all over the board and have so many resources to choose from. I find that I'm not returning to things as often as maybe my people need them, and I'm learning so much music and leading worship in multiple venues where I'm repeating things, but it's different when you meet one time a week. And then you figure if people miss 1 or 2 Sundays a month, what does that mean for how often they might come back to things? And if we don't repeat music, as a lot of our contemporary praise and worship churches, as the highest value might be the newest music, what does that mean for our churches when people don't have songs that they'll continue to sing over the years? So I think that's been really huge for me recently. I know I'm about to go over time. But I also serve as a pastor of music and worship at First Baptist Church in Hamilton, which is about an hour west of here. I've been there now in my 8th year, but it's a great small town church. It's not big and the resources are not huge, but yet it's a church that we have a sanctuary choir, a youth choir, 4 children's choirs, a handbell ensemble. And these kids and youth come from all over the community. And for their churches can't support ensembles like ours has, and ours wouldn't be that without the resources from the entire community. So learning to do ministry in a little different way than maybe I was trained, and I think that that's a great model for us moving forward too, of recognizing that it's not just about us, we're all in this together in many ways. And I just sang High School Musical in my head. We're all in this together, but I won't sing it for you. But I think it's a great thing. I hear that he has kids. And so looking at the things that working together can possibly do for us. I also lead worship at Truett Seminary in the chapel, and so that has given me kind of a playground for implementing a lot of these ideas for liturgical formation. And so ultimately, I see myself working in a seminary setting, but I'm always going to be connected to the local church in many ways. I see my role as kind of bridging the gap between those environments. Thanks. So,
my name is Marcelo Starnagel. I'm from Brazil. I'm also a pastor's kid. Me and Sam are leading a therapy group session later. And my education, I have a double major in conducting and composition, a master's in composition, all in Brazil. And I took a while between these degrees, and I served as an arts pastor for over 10 years at a Lutheran church in Brazil before coming here. Besides music, my main interests are martial arts, cooking, and all sorts of fun stuff. But coming to Baylor has been an interesting experience, and figuring out what you want to write about is another interesting experience. And this, I didn't come without any academic experience, but when you have to answer the question, what is your dissertation on, that's a big deal, because that basically entails the next couple years of your life. And one of the things I noticed is that we're always gonna have different research interests, and I started looking at it in terms of these circles, concentric circles. So we have all these interests, and one of the questions is how do they connect? And then you start asking, well, what are your fundamental questions as you go through your journey of church music or whatever you've done or haven't done in your life? You start asking the question, why have I done or haven't done those things, and how does this affect the kind of questions I'm going to ask and the kind of things that I'm going to write? I think ideally, I don't know about you guys, but for me, ideally, the things I research and the person I am, the things I believe, the kind of church service that I do, the kind of missionary work that I do, I like when it all comes together. I like to feel useful. And I also like to feel that the questions that we're asking may be useful for other people, and that's something that when you look at all these research interests, you may think, well, I'm not interested in that. You never know. The next paper you have to write may touch on any of these subjects, because church music is a very broad field and it entails all these different skill sets. Nowadays, I like to think of my research in three kind of rivers that sometimes mix and sometimes they're parallel. The first is in composition. I'm a composer, and I don't like classical music, concert music. I write liturgical music for use in the church. I write contemporary congregational music. And I'm very interested in what different musical systems and discourses do in worship. You know, what happens if you take a citation from Bach's St. Matthew Passion and connect it to a 12-tone row that you took out of a contemporary Hillsong piece, or, you know, well, you can do a bunch of things with Hillsong. You know, what happens when you do 8-tone music in the service, besides you getting a bunch of angry emails? But that's the first, so composition in the context of worship and what the music helps to accomplish, or how does it bother you, all those questions related to that. That leads me to the second major strand of scholarship, which is the musical the musical products of the negotiation of power differentials in worship. So what does that mean? That's a good question. I'm trying to answer that. When you have a missionary, a white missionary coming from Europe, working in a different cultural environment, and maybe imposing a couple of cultural perspectives along with the gospel, what happens there? What happens between across racial lines when you're negotiating these different priorities and tensions? What happens between contemporary and traditional worship when you're negotiating, basically the worship wars? What do you do? And what results from these negotiations? What kind of music results? What happens when what results from a negotiation of the secular and the sacred? So I have a couple of papers that I've been tampering with constantly, because we're never done with our papers. I wrote one called The Sound of Cathedral, Spirit of Rock, which is basically an examination of how the sound of the band U2's Joshua Tree in the 70s became what we call worship style in the late 90s and early aughts. I wrote another paper called Smells Like Jesus Freak, which is Nirvana's 1991 Nevermind, and then DC Talk's 1994 Jesus Freak, and the introduction to the single is exactly the same, in the same key, and then you start asking, well, what is that? Is that a copy? Is that an influence? What are they saying when they decide to do that? Because you don't do that without knowing what you're doing, hopefully. That's the second strand. And the third is an application of performance theory into worship. Performance theory is a rather new field of scholarship, but a very important field of scholarship which has been making inroads into ethnomusicology, anthropology, cultural studies, popular music studies. And it's connected to what Nate was saying at the beginning, you know, how do the things you do, how you perform worship, the things you say, the gestures you do, the way you put liturgy together, the songs you choose, when you stand up, when you sit down, what you dress, how does that help to build what we consider worship in our churches? And I've been using concepts like performative utterances in worship. You know, what happens when you close your eyes, when you raise your hands, and all these kind of, not in a bad way, but stereotypical gestures that we adopt as our own for expression in worship. What does that mean? What are you saying? And what are people reading from what you're saying? So hopefully out of this big conglomerate of different things, I will be able to distill some sort of dissertation question. And whereas some of our colleagues already have their question, we're still looking at you know, what we're going to end up writing about. But it's a fascinating journey, and I'm really happy to be here and be able to ask these questions. Joe Nolis, ladies and gentlemen.
You want to say my name? Right. I'm so glad that Marcel actually went right for me, because there's so many things that kind of dovetail with the way he's thinking and how I've been thinking since coming here. I'd also like to echo just having the opportunity to be here to ask these questions. Questions are exhausting. They are, and having the resources and opportunities and guidance to seek those questions out is just wonderful. So my background is I started as a piano major in undergrad. Had some amazing philosophy and sociology professors. Said, okay, I got to revamp this thing and do some liberal arts so I can explore these questions, and did that. Then I 5 years later. So if you don't go to grad school right after undergrad, it's fine. You're good school.
Not gonna die.
Yeah.
10 years later.
I went to IU Jacob School of Music, and I did music theory there. Really just kind of transformative time in my life. And now I'm here, and I'm probably thinking theory, church music. How do these things? There is a bit of oil and water that we're experiencing as being here, but they are also very, very similar. Both fields really pride themselves in multi-musicality, being able to talk and jive in different musical spheres. We know this as church musicians. I don't know, my job on a Sunday morning is crazy. So 8:15 traditional choir robe, rip that thing off, rock out with the band at 9, whatever, and then at 11 it's blended worship. And they're all like 15 minutes, and I feel really comfortable switching between all of those different genres. And really, it's theory that does that for me, because it's like it's this connective tissue that exists in all these worlds. All those skill degrees are being used differently in different contexts. So that's the first thing. And actually taking Dr. Bradley's music education seminar really opened my mind to. I spent so much time training and teaching the musicians under my care in church, but never the congregation. And it's like, why didn't I thought to do that ever? And so this when did I teach this class? I can't remember. But I taught a class for the congregation, which was Congregational Singing 101, kind of embracing the vertical and horizontal aspects of singing in God's house. We sing to the Lord. We also sing to encourage each other, and that was really like, whoa, really? So it was a really cool session. Through some scale degrees, I went through some hymns, sang 2-part harmony, and then talked to some. It was just a good mishmash, but there was such an energy. Like, why do you do this in worship? Why does this happen musically? And I'm like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that all this was going on. And if you're thinking about a congregation that's more musically in tune, that knows more about music, they're going to be able to utilize it to form in worship a lot more effectively. So music education is a big part of what I do. Now, theory and writing as a theorist in church music. There's a lot of different things that I like to do. I love to teach. And so some of you have got the pleasure of being able to teach. I'm sorry. But I love doing it. I really do. Seeing, helping another mind connect to concepts that mean so much to me, and having the challenge of how do I help it connect for them in their unique way, and never having a cookie cutter way of teaching. I would say that pedagogy, helping musicians know how to do church music better. Sometimes knowing some things can really help. That's something I'm really passionate about. So the pedagogy is one aspect. Analysis is another one. Sometimes, we focus a lot on how the music functions in worship, but the music has its own language too. And so I like to look at the language of the music and try to, what is the composer thinking as Marcel was doing? Well, atonal music in worship, could be a beautiful thing, part of what it is. Sometimes not, so how does that work? Another aspect of what I like to do is to help to give life to pieces of music which have been forgotten. And that's actually where I would like to end here. I have some copies of a piece I'm actually writing a paper on right now, some abstracts. It's by Ulysses K. It's called The Choral Triptych. We actually performed it here fairly recently. Ulysses K. was a very prolific Black American composer, exceptionally prolific. He actually won the Prix de Rome twice. You guys, yeah, so you could,
It's not fair.
He's a great composer and writes in a very atonal style, but a very accessible style. So I don't have enough time. I didn't know that we were going to be such a massive group here. But I think if 2 to 3 people share per copy, I think we can all take a look at this. So we'll start just passing it around. Yeah. Oh, this feels so thin. Yeah. So make sure they spread the love around.
Start with this end. Yeah, just share amongst yourselves.
Yeah. All right. This is a little awkward. This turns around. All right. Okay. All right. Everybody got a copy? All right. We'll wait a little bit. All right. So as those copies are going around,
There's another one.
all right, so as those copies are going around, just a little bit more background on this piece. So Ulysses K. was in New York at the time, and his wife was actually in the South working as a freedom fighter at the time when this piece was written. Well, it's posted at 1967. He actually had gotten his first premiere of this piece in early 1963. In 1962, the latter parts of 1962, his wife had been imprisoned. And then this is the first piece that comes after this. He has records that you can go to Columbia University. I would have to take a trip there and look at some of the source documents, but I really do feel that this piece is his way of, his prayer for his wife. Give ear to my word, O Lord, is the first movement. The second movement is how long will people oppress me? And the last movement is an alleluia. Let's just go ahead and sing. There we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. Whoops. Give ear to my words, O Lord. Consider my meditation. Hearken unto the voice of my cry, my King and my God, for unto thee will I pray. In the morning, oh guys, sorry about ladies, I should have brought you in there. All right, and that section moves on. Let's now switch on to the bottom of page 6. How could this be, used worshipfully? This is really a petitional prayer. Some quick things I'll say about it. What the vantage point I'm writing about is that he has he's utilizing half steps to intensify this prayer. You start for the very opening. We have A with its upper neighbor, half step up, lower neighbor, just a tone below. And he utilizes these elements all the way through to intensify the prayer. So that's it's all from the very, very beginning. And my time is up.
What questions do you have for the panel or for a specific person on the panel? Joshua.
So Nate, you said you did some mission work. Where did you do this work?
I work for a ministry called CTI Music Ministries, and it's an affiliate for Youth for Christ International. And I was a team leader for touring musicians and touring bands. So I worked in the Philippines and Honduras, and accidentally El Salvador. And then we were in the U.S. and Canada. We played in prisons and homeless shelters and halfway houses and rehabs and that kind of stuff, as well as high schools and churches. So, orphanages too. So.
Somebody else? I'm sure there's some things that were not well understood here. A question that you might ask. Alex.
Yeah, I just have a question about, I guess, the doctoral experience in general. So at what point do you have to come up with your dissertation topic, and how does that process work?
Rock music?
If we could get it clear, we'd really like to hear this answer.
I did mine, that's all. Back then, we were using stone tablets.
Explains so much.
Well, it's got to be something that strikes your fancy, something that you will enjoy doing, because you're going to spend months and maybe even years on the project, and so something that you find to be fascinating and that you want to explore more deeply. Certainly, in terms of timing, you all can speak probably better to that at this point.
Well, one thing about the finding a topic that you love, when we went to the last Church Music Forum on Black Gospel music, and he was just up there playing clips of the things that he loved, I thought, man, this guy has found it. This obviously, this is something that his heart and soul and being are in. And how can you go wrong with whether anybody else likes it or not? You're engaged in it, so that's good. But yeah, timing-wise, I think all of us kind of had an idea of what our passions were when we came into the program. We've all been around long enough that we've made some of those decisions, but it's really changed and morphed and found new things while we've been here.
One of the great things about church music is the wide range of interests within our field. And I think sometimes one of the reasons we wanted to have this conversation today is so that we could all say, oh wow, look at how much you might, and that's just 5 perspectives, look how many things you might consider. So it's such a broad field. How big is the dissertation? How long is your dissertation? How many pages was your dissertation?
I'm kind of embarrassed to say it's like 89 pages. It was not very long.
Hey, yes. That's on the page. Done. 440.
Some of us can say in fewer words.
All right, so as you might expect, 235. Yeah, but who's counting, right? That's something you don't forget, actually, slugging out those pages.
Alex, I think a major difference in Brazil or in places where you would come into the PhD program with a research project. In some places, that's what would get you accepted. Whereas in a lot of places in the U.S., you go into the program and then you sort of flesh out your dissertation proposal. And I've come to, when I was applying to Baylor, I thought, well, this is just weird, because I had all these things to fire off. But this is a good process. On the one hand, it raises so many questions that you might panic a little bit, but on the other hand, once you get a grasp of the literature in the field, and sometimes you think you have a great idea and somebody's written a dissertation about it already.
Yeah.
But it gives you start asking questions, knowing what's out there, and I think that's smart. we have 2 to 2.5 years of coursework, and then comps, comprehensive exams, submit the dissertation proposal, and then work. So it might take you, you know, between, I don't know,
3.5
yeah,
yeah.
to finish up.
Something else though about the dissertation, I've seen a lot of people just have so much angst that they must find like, this must be my opus, this must be my life, and I don't know about you guys, but it's, sometimes there's so many questions you can answer, just decide to do one and get it done, you know? That's also a part of it, you know, and then also picking a topic that it's not just us, it's also who will advise us. You know, this is kind of like birthing a baby, in a sense. You know, you're going to take them on to that journey with you. It has to be something that, so knowing the environment that you're in, the professors you're working with, and you know, over time it kind of coagulates. Creativity is helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really important. When the way I found out about Baylor, it was I was kind of academically looking into the things that Dr. Ingalls had written, and I found a lot of resonance there. The first time I wrote with her, she was still at Cambridge, and then she said, "Well, I'm moving to Texas because of Baylor," and I said, "What's Baylor?"
What's Baylor?
So it's almost like following the trail of the scholarship and the people who are doing what you're interested in.
And hopefully in the future, people will follow the trail of these students.
No, don't do
Yeah.
it. I'm just
And people will read what they've done and then say, now where did you write that? And one of the things that we think is good is that we do have students with varied interests. We didn't really want this program to be a doctoral program in which everybody writes about a very small little area. We wanted it to be as broad as we could advise, but also to represent the diversity of the church's music. Yeah. What other questions? Yeah, Sam.
So all of you, in a sense, are writing about how culture, the music in scene and culture relates to how church music functions in the church, in the congregation. You're all coming at it with your own personal backgrounds. All four of you who are writing, sorry Sam, no offense.
That's okay, Sam.
So, I'm glad we can see eye to eye.
Sam.
All four of you. Thanks for catching that, Dr. All four of you have radically different backgrounds. Radically. Jamaica, Brazil, Kentucky, Canada, and who knows what else.
Close enough.
Yeah, right.
What I think would be interesting is combining all four of your different perspectives and seeing how those correlate with one another, how they relate with one another, and how you can utilize them together in a team and see how that would function in a singular church.
Did you hang out in the doctoral office sometime? Good idea.
I think, go ahead.
What else are we doing?
Please.
I just have to stop.
No, you. No, you.
A couple of things that are important. One, I thank God for the cohorts because, you know, we for example, me and Nate were in a program that gathers PhDs from across Baylor, and some of these guys, or these girls, these people go through hard situations where they don't get to talk about the issues. And whenever we get together, there's that mix of scholarship and passion that is just so life-giving. That's number one. Number two is the place where Baylor is right now, and our faculty. If you look at Dr. Bradley and Dr. Ingalls and Dr. Music, you have authorities that represent different areas of church music, but they complement each other so well that it gives you all this freedom, and you learn. So it's like the perfect triumvirate of people who you can choose to study under, which creates great opportunities to ask these questions. And the last thing I think is, I'm from Brazil. I've worked in Asia. I've worked in Europe, I've worked in all these different places. But I agree with you that it seems like nowadays a lot of people are asking some form of similar questions. And it's humbling and it's good, like to hear Jacob talk about the Gaither Band, which is something that I would not write about. But when I listen to him talk about it, it helps me with my scholarship, and it shows how connected things are.
And just to piggyback on that, it's more of a concrete example for you, Sam. Like right now, Joe and Marcel and I are working on a paper that we just came up with last week.
Yes.
And it turns out it was just one of those things that writes itself. The question of, the worship chord, right? The idea of like contemporary worship has a certain sound. Or, as we say in scholarship, sonority, right? Because we have used good words like that. And we're kind of making the case that the certain application of a 4 and 2 suspension between your 1 and 5 home, the home, is actually a theological representation of transcendence, and that it brings to mind this idea of now, not yet, of liminal space between what is to come and what is now. And so we're just making that case that that's actually what's going on from music theory and from theology. Yeah, certainly. Hopefully in a couple weeks.
And the thing is they can't be wrong, right? So, no one can say you're wrong. It's the great thing about original scholarship, right?
Well, not yet, in a few years, they'll say,
In that
with
field.
those guys, thank you.
How do you prove though that that's not?
Too many ways. don't make me think that. So yeah, that's an example though of like what we can, because of all the different interests. Marcel's musicology background, Joe's theory background, my theology background, and when we're able to talk to each other and work together because we have this common language that these three have given us, we can understand each other. We can say, oh, this means this and this means this, and hey, that's a thing, that kind of deal.
So I have another question, sorry to, but on the point that you guys have such similar questions, the big why? Why do you think that is? Why do you think it's becoming so important for the church to find where it is, what it is in the midst of this world?
Hair.
Okay, a good part of my pastoral work, I have a similar background in the rock and roll, the touring, and my office was in a mosh pit. A major part of my pastoral work has been with the weird people. People who might not necessarily feel comfortable in a church environment.
Misfits.
Yeah. And working with that particular contingent has helped me to realize that the church has a hard time talking about a number of things that involve worship. Just to keep the conversation to just church music. And in the past and today, a lot of times we prefer not talking about things than talking about things. So it's easier to stay inside your bubble. And I think there's a very missiological aspect to this whole academic exercise because, and that's important. That's important work. And Nate mentioned the expression, the tools that our teachers have given us to talk about these things. That's a precious gift because that avoids conflict. It opens up possibilities for dialogue. So I think that's one of the reasons why our very areas of scholarship, they converge towards these similar questions. They're questions about the conversation between church music and culture at large, maybe.
As we sort of close our time today, I would like for you to get to hear a little bit more from Maria about her past and what she has done. And would you mind standing, and you're used to being in front of classes all the time, so tell us a little bit about your background and where you're from and your other degrees and what you do and a little bit about your work. We'd really love for everybody to hear a little more about that.
Okay, so my name is Maria Monteiro. I'm also from Brazil.
Yes!
If you know your geography, Brazil is a very big country. I come from the top eastern area of Brazil, right on the coast, and Marcel is way down south, so we're very different backgrounds. I actually graduated from Baylor twice. I have an undergrad in music history and my master's in music history. A long time ago. Sam said he's old, he's not old. I think so. I don't know how many of you are new students music and master's program, but when we had our first meeting this semester, they told, say something, that distinguishes you from everybody else. And I said, I'm old. I'm so old that I have a daughter who has a master's from Baylor. So my degree is in music history, and during that time, I was doing research in Renaissance music. And so that was my interest. I don't know how many of you have heard of Dr. Elzinga. He was my mentor here. And then I went to Duke University and did almost all the work for a dissertation, for a PhD in musicology. So I had some kind of misunderstanding with my comedian. I decided that was not what I wanted to do, so I went my own way and did all kinds of different things. Teaching privately, teaching churches, in day schools, in little children, things that I never thought I was going to do in my life. People who knew me were teaching young children, that's very strange. But I just tried everything that was presented to me, and I found I'm going to try it. And then I realized that I discovered many things I didn't know about me that I could do and I like to do. So I did this for a long time, and eventually I was invited to go to San Antonio to work in this small school that I had never heard of, and which today is the Baptist University of the Americas, but used to be, it has many names, since 1947, a Spanish institution. Everything was done in Spanish until 2000, when they decided we're going to change and get accreditation. So now, imagine you are in the middle of the semester, and now you have to do everything in English. You have to learn English, and that's how I'm going to graduate from this school. So I joined that school, and they didn't have a music program, they only had theology. But they had a lot of students who wanted to learn music, so I was the music teacher. So if they didn't like me, I taught music theory, I taught beginning with piano, music appreciation, and then I kind of worked with them, and I was in my mind trying to see if we're going to start a music program here, what can we do in this environment? One thing about this school, so it's a Hispanic school. I would say that 80% of the people on campus are bilingual, Spanish and English. We have a minority of Anglo students and a few Asian students and a few African American students. Most of the students are Hispanic, which is a very unusual environment in a university. Also, I would say maybe 40% of our students come from below the poverty line. So it's also a university for the poor. So you can see it's a very unique place. I don't think there is a place quite like it. So that's where I find myself. Note that I'm from Brazil, so I actually speak Portuguese. But when I was here at Baylor, going to school, we had a friend who was in the religion department and was a pastor in a little mission. And he said, don't you want to work in my church? And it was a Hispanic mission, everybody spoke Spanish, and my husband and I went and we learned. And so this has all come together, and that's what we do. My husband also works at this school. He's the academic dean. And so I've been there for 13 years now, and since 2012 we have a music program. We have 26 people, and one thing that distinguishes us is also that we do not have any auditions. So I talk to many people, do you think it's possible to teach music to people that have never taken music until they are adults? And people said, it's a crazy idea, but I think you can do it. So we decided, let's try it. And we have found amazing potential. And many of these students, they may not want to be professional musicians, but now we give them the opportunity to teach, to learn music. Because many of them come and say, this has been my dream. I have never had a chance. Because they come, like I said, from, even if they grow up here, many of them have, but they are usually very poor schools, that they have never really had access to music. And they're ones that say, well, I do play flute, but they can't read music. They just memorize what people are doing because they don't really have the education. So this is what I do, but also, actually, I forgot to say, I also am the music director of the first Mexican Baptist church in San Antonio, which is a different world. See, it's a BUA, that's where I teach, is this Hispanic environment, and we have about 23 nations represented in a little over 300 students. So it's very also international. Everybody has an accent. So we feel very comfortable talking. We're not afraid of it. We ask questions we don't know, we get confused, but that's what we do. And then I was called to lead the congregational singing in this church. And they have 2 services. This is the first Mexican church in San Antonio, founded in 1888, the second oldest Mexican church in the country, also born out of segregation. They could not be with everybody else. So they had their own church in Spanish, but since 2000 they now have an English mission, which is also very unusual. So we have the big congregation in Spanish, and then we have a smaller service where people speak English. So it's usually the opposite. The dominant language in the culture is Mexican. But I am there, and they accept me with I have an accent in whatever language I speak, Spanish or English. I have an accent in Portuguese. But so now I'm here because I have been doing church music for about 12 years now. Well, apart from what I did though as a church member, very faithful Baptist. I'm a minority here, I think, I'm Baptist. So I'm looking forward to what I'm going to learn. So I have great colleagues. I only have class with Sam, Nate, and Marcel. So I echo what they say about the opportunity to, ask questions. Sometimes we have some readings and I say in class, is this a thing? This is just weird. So I'm trying to just discover my interest. As you can see, I have a lot of ideas, the place where I live and where I work and where I have learned in my life so far. So I look forward to exploring those ideas here. So, thank you.
I don't know about you, but I'm going away more inspired than when I came. From all of these students and from Maria's closing remarks, there's so much to be learned from each other. I hope if you didn't think about that very much before you came today, I hope that you're going away thinking, wow, I'm in such a lively place, such a rich environment. There's so much to learn. If I just hung out in the hall all day and talked to people that are not like me, wow, how educated could I become? And so here we are in this rich and diverse place. Take it in, enjoy every moment of it, and relish it. Don't let it get away from you. And go in peace.
And sign the rosary.